All right, I think we have at least 8 of our committee members on, so I'll go ahead and start with roll call so we can get our meeting started. Move everybody's time here today. Councilman Waring, I don't see him yet. Councilman Seekings.
I am here.
Good morning. Mr.
Morning.
Batista.
Morning.
Morning. Mr. Warner. Don't see him in the squares. Bob.
Good morning.
Good morning. Mr. Green. Let's see. Susan.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Cashin.
Morning.
Good
Present.
morning. Kevin Mills. I believe Kevin is out of town, so I don't think he'll be joining us today. Laura.
Good morning.
Good morning. Jordy. Mr. Frazier.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Mr. Maybank. And Mr. Chairman Haygood Morrison.
Here, good morning.
Good morning. And I see we also have Councilwoman Jackson joining us. So thank you for joining us today, Councilwoman. I will go ahead and throw it over to the chair to kick us off.
Very well, thank you, everybody. As always, thank you for your time today. The subject, I know we a handful of items to work through, including I know an update on the timeline as was brought up during our last meeting. And that update will come from Mark and Kaylin, and then secondly go through the working group updates, and then thirdly go through a little bit of kind of open discussion towards the end of the meeting as the third agenda item. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Kaylin and Mark to discuss timeline.
Okay, thank you, Hagen. Kaylin, have I got permission? I think I do. Yep. All right. So I just want to say that Kaylin has been working really, really hard on trying to put a timeline together that we can get on one page that takes all of the things in. Can you see that timeline? Is that up on everybody's screen? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. So a couple of things that you asked me to go and find out, and I did from the last meeting. One is the way the Army Corps does their EIS, and many of you may already know this, I did not, or I would have mentioned it. The report that's coming out is going to be a draft report slant bar EIS. It's a combined document. Okay. It is, the EIS will be embedded into the draft report. And you'll see that when you get a look at it, that it's got many new sections in it. And they've really expanded on a lot of the sections dealing with the things that the EIS said they would deal with, which is the environment, environmental justice, and then the cultural and the aesthetic mitigation thing. So just so that everybody's aware, when we get to the date, if you look in September timeline, the draft report will be released on 9/10. You will get the draft report. The EIS will be embedded in that. We will also get a look at the section 106 programmatic agreement will also be released at the same time. And that's what Cashin has been sitting as part of that group, along with myself and folks from planning. You'll see the draft programmatic agreement, okay, which is a very lengthy document that talks about how they're going to deal with our historic and cultural resources throughout the city. So all three of those documents will be released on September 10th, and we'll have a 45-day comment period for the public, for groups, for everybody to comment on. So are there any questions on that? That was a question you all had last week. And I will tell you that when I reached out to the folks at the Army and said, this is a question, they were apologetic, and their comment was, we apologize. This is the way we always do it. This is their policy, and they thought everybody knew that. And sometimes they take it for granted. So it was good that we learned it and we passed it on before we actually get there. So any questions on that at all? The draft report and the EIS?
Can we get a copy of this timeline, Mark?
Yes. Yeah. Once we wanted to get some feedback, and then we're going to send it to y'all. Like I said, Kalen's worked really hard. Yes, Susan.
Can you tell me the difference between the 106 program agreement and the EIS that's in
Yes.
draft?
Yep. I can. So section 106 stands on its own, but you'll see documentation. It'll be referenced in the actual draft report in the EIS, but it results in a separate programmatic agreement that there are a number of parties that sign on to it. And maybe if Cashin, if you want to help me out and talk about who those parties are, it's something we've been working on now for about 6 months, and it's gone back and forth with a bunch of lawyers and a bunch of agencies. But Cashin, you've been as much a part of it or more than me. Maybe if you want to talk about it a little bit.
Sure. So the programmatic agreement is something that's dictated by the National Historic Preservation Act. And it determines, because the project is deemed to have an adverse impact to historic and cultural resources, that the Corps has to determine how they're going to deal with those impacts, how they're going to mitigate, and determine a dispute resolution process for how, when we have a disagreement about how we're dealing with impacts to historic properties. There are a number of parties involved, from the State Historic Preservation Office in the state to the oh my gosh, I'm totally blanking, the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, sorry, at the national level. Historic Charleston is involved, the Preservation Society is involved. There are some tribes involved. So all of these groups come together, and we have been working on language in this programmatic agreement. I'm not sure how the length of what the length of it is, but I didn't realize it had come to 6 months, Mark, but thanks for that reminder. But we've been working on the agreement of the language. I would say that we have been really focused on trying to get the Corps to agree to avoidance of historic resources as they look at alignment and engineering. That is something that we tried to get them to focus on in the preamble of the document. And we have been through 2 official rounds of drafts and official rounds of comment periods. Both of those have concluded, and we'll have a 3rd round in this open public comment period. And so we, I'm happy to be a resource, Susan, to you and to others, as I'm sure Mark will, in answering questions about it when it becomes publicly available.
Yeah, it's a pretty robust document. It's bound in law, so they're pretty. We have to follow the rules, and they have to follow the rules. And I will say that I didn't even know about this advisory group up in Washington, D.C. that's charged with just making sure things like this go right. And they're a pretty well-informed group of people who know the law pretty darn well. So I feel pretty comfortable that the methods are in place to make sure that Section 106 is followed through, because of those other groups that are looking at it all the time. And there's a dispute resolution process, and you'll see that in the draft document as well. So so that programmatic agreement will be there. The EIS will be available for review. It'll actually be part of the draft report. It's going to be around 290 pages. So you will have fun sitting down to read that at night. Lots of interesting things to learn, I believe. But anyway, that's what happens on September 10th. So on October 26th is when the Army Corps will stop taking comments on the draft report and the EIS and the programmatic agreement. So all three of those documents will have a 45-day review period. The other thing that's happened to the timeline is that they have pushed out by a month the period when the city needs to give them a final answer from November to December. Don't have a specific date, but I noticed on the last update from them, it moved from November to December, which gave us a little bit of breathing room as well.
Hey, Mark.
So, yeah,
Hey, sorry, winding back the tape.
yeah.
The meeting on September 22nd, 3x3 meeting with mayor and staff. That's the same as the 14th meeting, but a narrower attendance?
No, on the 14th, the Army Corps is giving an update to City Council and the public. And then the 22nd would be the follow-up meeting after they give that public presentation.
Mark, that's my fault. I'm sorry. Bob, 9/22, and I'll go back and change that before I send it, should be blue. So that'll be a committee meeting. And
Right.
we're gonna have the mayor and pertinent city staff in front of you all, because we're hoping at some point after you see some of the draft report, you'll have some more language to begin to formulate your recommendations to start to update the mayor and then the following week, city council. So I apologize. I will update that when I send it out, but that should be in blue because that's a committee, not an Army Corps timeline.
Good catch, Bob. Okay, any other questions on the timeline that you're looking at? And I know there's a lot there, so please digest it and we'll.
Yeah, I have one first of all,
Okay.
Caitlin, thank you very much for putting this together. It's really helpful, and the color coding is just provides more dimension to all the moving pieces. And I'm still digesting it like everyone else, but just one suggestion is that we keep this as a living document and add to it and refine it as we go forward. You know, it's my sense or assumption that after September 10th, it's going to get real for this committee, because we're going to actually have something to review instead of speculate about, which has been part of the challenge that I think we've encountered in some of our discussions so far.
I have a question. Sorry, Bob.
Another question. I'm still sort of foggy on the level, the intensity of commitment in December relative to the city's buy-in. That's a financial obligation. It's the equivalent of a verbal letter of intent. I mean, what is the anchoring of that? It financially obligates us, right?
No, what it says, it's called a financial letter of capability. So we are saying that we have the capability to pay for it. Now, I want to be clear. I want to be totally transparent. By signing that, the city is saying we have the capability. Obviously, we're also going to sign another letter that says we support the plan. Okay. Because before Army Corps leadership is going to sign off on $1 billion plus commitment, they're going to want to make sure the non-federal sponsor, one, either supports the plan or doesn't. If they don't, it's an easy review. Okay, no reason to proceed. And two, if we don't have the financial capability, then why proceed? Okay.
Yeah, Mark and Caitlin, if it can be, maybe we put it in bold, but where the exagrams are, where the financial obligation gets real, in concrete, that'd be useful. You know, up to that point, maybe, you know, it's an easier departure if that is the avenue chosen. So when do we have a date for when the city council or whoever the powers that be obligates us financially to this project?
So I don't have an exact date, but I can give you what would be the milestone. Okay, and that's really just developed over the last 48, 72 hours. And again, I'm learning all this. If the Army Corps were able to get federal funding in their 2022 work plan to begin to put the contracts in place to set up the preliminary engineering and design phase, that would be the contracts that outline how that phase would work. That would be the first time the city would be asked to contribute money, and that would be around $150,000.
So that's a cash flow answer. When is the contractual obligation set in stone? Not till 2022?
Oh yeah.
Hey, Bob and Mark, I think the quick clarification here, and I think that the Corps brought this up just to help frame this discussion a little bit, is that the financial obligation isn't like, we're not financially obligated until, like, for the entire amount until construction begins on the last phase of it. I mean, it's a scope by scope contribution. So if we, for example, my understanding is if we get through PED and there's a non-starter there, that ends our financial obligation. Or if we get through construction of phase one and there's a non-starter from that point forward, then that ends our financial obligation going forward.
No,
So it's, yeah, so I think that may be the clarification, is that, not to look at it
Yeah,
as a
my
single
question-
scope item.
My question more specifically is, when do we cross the Rubicon? When is the first city council vote, or whoever is going to authorize the city spending money? The cash flow will come later, but when do we have an obligation to the project financially?
So going back to what Hagen said, your first obligation would be to funding these initial contracts. And then each year, the Army would come to us each year and say, we want to proceed and go this much further. City, do you have the financial capability? Are you in? Okay. So they, each year before they go, the big money, and I think that's what you're asking for, Bob, the big money would be for PED, certainly will be a good chunk of change. But then once you get through PED and everybody has a design, then the construction. Once you start construction and those construction contracts are laid out, we are obligated for that particular phase. When is that? That could be 2-3 years from now. I don't know.
Mark,
Yeah.
so actually, I think Bob brings up a great question and inquiry. It might be helpful. This timeline is fantastic, and appreciate you and Kaylin working on this. It might be good to incorporate these commitments, whether it be part of cash flow. Like, it would be good to see them both, right? Like, in other words, here's how much we have to spend, and then here's how much we're committing. Now, I will say this, as far as financial capability, I mean, that's just a statement. I mean, I could tell everyone on this call today that I have the financial capability to buy the plaza in New York, but when chickens come home to roost, then ultimately either I can pay or I can't. Like, to me, proving financial capability through due diligence is to say, we have the capability, and here's where the money's coming from, and here's how it's committed. So I get a little bit concerned about the statement of financial capability because it's got to have substance behind it. So that's an interesting concept. But having that cash flow in here, because my guess would be, if what I'm hearing correctly based on the feasibility of this is, we might have the financial capability to handle certain pieces of this, but then they could wind up designing the whole thing, and we could be contributing money to that effort. And then when it comes time to implement, we may say, nah, we don't have the money for that, and we've just spent money on design. We could spend money on design, do one phase of this, and then not have money for the next phase, in which case then we've got an incomplete project. So I think it would be good to see that laid out like Bob was saying, that we can kind of see, okay, what are we committing to? And then at what point in time do we have sunk cost into this effort? Because there's no guarantee. What scares me about this is at the point in time where we determine to spend $1, that doesn't provide us with the assurance that the entire project will be funded and completed.
Absolutely. And
Yeah, I
sorry to
think-
be so persistent on this question, but this
Yeah.
goes counter to what I think, at least I, not speaking for the group, but I was under the impression that there was a city council meeting circa September where we would become, the council would vote to have the city become financially obligated. So maybe that was just my misunderstanding, but this puts that event, that milestone, out a year, 2 years, I don't know.
Yeah, I think, no, Bob, I think I want to go back and say, I think what you were thinking is exactly the way it was probably portrayed. And I can certainly understand why you were feeling and thinking that way. In December, the city council will, for the first time, have to say, we support it, we don't, and we have the financial capability or we don't. But as we looked at, and for those of you, I mean, Danny, you probably know this better than me, when you start laying contracts out, everything goes in phases. These are big chunks of money that will be laid out over multiple years. Here's the thing, if there was a gigantic storm that came and tore up Charleston, we would probably get full federal funding immediately for this if we had a project. Okay, that's historically what's happened in the past. If you've got a project that's signed, or you may get partial federal funding if you've got a project and it gets going and they're going to fund it immediately in full. That's all ifs, right? There's a lot of ifs. What we do know is that the way these things are worked, and we're watching it unfold in Norfolk today, is let's get through this phase. We get to a PED phase where everybody is comfortable. Now, should we go forward and ask for construction funding? Congress authorizes so much construction funding. City, do you have the match to go forward with this? Yes, we do. I think what we've learned through this process is that if you start phase one, you've got to finish phase one. You have to. We would be crazy not to start. Each of these phases can stand on their own because we're fortunate we've got a city with a 11, 12 foot high arch in the middle of it that keeps the water from moving from one side of the peninsula to the other. So you can do phase one, it can stand on its own. Phase two, we're pretty much doing now. We got to raise it, but then phase three would again stand on its own without, and then phase four will be the last phase. So specifically put together that way. Yes. Laura, you haven't spoken yet.
No, I have spoken and I'm trying to resist taking up airtime. And Dan, you might have wanted to respond specifically to Mark's comment. If you do, then go for it. I had a slightly, well, it's related to this thread, but it might take us in a little bit of
The
different.
one comment is that my understanding was we couldn't just piecemeal this in phases. My understanding was it needs to be constructed that way, but that it's only effective if we complete all the phases and create the overall barrier. So now I'm hearing, no, we could isolate areas and just do a perimeter protection wall in certain areas.
Yeah, so I want to be clear what I said now. Each phase stands on its own because it provides protection to that area on its own. So if you do phase one, it's going to take a storm like we've never seen to get water from phase three up and over to phase one. Okay. Likewise, if you did phase three, it would take water that, you know, the height of the peninsula at Meeting and King Street, that's our high supply. So the phases kind of stand on their own in that respect. So when you do phase one, you've provided protection for the west side of the peninsula, the medical district, wrapped around West Edge to the Joe. That area is protected. It would take, you'd have to come up over 13 feet of water or more. I don't even know what the height is at Meeting and King Street in order for it to come up and over and then flood the other side of the peninsula. So you essentially have a wall up the middle.
Right, but doesn't water seek its own level? Like, in other words, at some point, I can understand if there's a wall protecting the west side, and let's say we had a tsunami, that hits that wall. It may look like it's protecting that area, but the water comes around it and fills the bathtub.
It would have to come up and over Meeting Street after you've fixed phase 1.
Got it. So there's,
Okay.
so it would not necessarily flood that area. It would only flood surrounding areas.
It would flood phase 3, which is the east side, because you don't have any protection there. The water would come in, just like the mayor was saying yesterday. You saw it climb up Calhoun Street, go all the way up to Meeting Street. Now, I'm not telling you if a tsunami came that it wouldn't go up and over Meeting Street. I'm just saying, you've got the protection of the height of the peninsula there.
Got
And
it.
Mark, another point of clarification, and I think it's important that we do make the distinction between obligation and cash flow.
Mhm.
I was under the impression that at a point in time, pretty soon, and maybe it was the September milestone, the city had to commit to the entire casino. The entire, and yeah, then it would get parsed out over the phases, PED and then the 4 phases. But I didn't think that the Army Corps was going to approach Congress without knowing that the city was making a financial commitment in stone for the whole casino.
Yeah, there is not a document that I'm aware of that puts the city, that says we can pay for this whole thing, guaranteed. It says we have the financial capability, but it does not sign us up to pay for that. In fact, and again, I'll pull the Army back to answer this question, but I've asked them this many times. There are many of these projects around the country where the non-federal sponsor has just not had the money to proceed, so they haven't gone to Congress and asked for the next batch of money.
Okay, for me, that's new news.
Yeah.
But it might just be me. I thought we were, no, yeah.
Yeah, this is, I want to be clear though, as a city, we should be ready to say we're committing to the whole project. And then if our financial situation changes, then let's say we said we were going to commit to it and then the pandemic hit.
So the Army Corps is going to approach Congress for the total funding amount, the appropriation, without the city committing to participate in the total project. Is that correct?
The city is going to have to say they have the financial capability, they support the plan. The Army will first go forward and ask for funding for PED. That's the first ask. Then they will go forward and ask for construction for the first phase of the contract. The project will be approved as a total project as a project approval. The project approval does not mean that Congress has authorized the money. It means that the Army has said, we support the project and we've signed off on it.
I think it's going to be this is a very helpful discussion and puts into high relief for me how important it is to be really clear about these distinctions and what the city is going to be asked to do and when. And I understand phasing phases and paying for them in those phases. But to Dan's point about making a commitment and initial investments, if you aren't prepared to invest all the way through and buy the whole casino, then you've wasted your money. So those are distinctions that I think that's what I'm hearing, and I think that we're talking about. And I'm still not clear about when the city makes that first statement of financial capability or commitment. I'm hearing September. If it is September, that needs to be in our timeline because I don't see it there. And then I have another question, which is back into August. What is the 3x3 meeting on finance on the 25th?
We were hoping to be able to bring from after the financial working group gets through talking with our CFO and others, that we could spend that particular meeting talking about finance, about how you do bonds, how you might do other forms of financing.
That's a committee meeting, a standing committee meeting that would be focused on finance.
Right.
I have a couple of questions.
Can I just clear up on a couple of things though? First, I just want to be clear on two things. One, the commitment date for city council will be December. Okay, it's not September, it's now December. It was November, it's moved to December. Okay, so that date is clear, that should be December. The second thing is, if you build phase one and you ran out of money, let's say, you've not wasted your money. Phase one will still protect the west side of the peninsula, just like we just spent $60 million, or we're spending $60 million to rebuild the battery to protect phase two. It's the same concept. The problem with phase two is on its own, you can get wraparound because it doesn't reach 12 feet on either side. Okay, so that is a distinction, and I just wanted to be clear on both of those. Susan.
Yeah, hi. From a communication standpoint, this whole discussion would be really difficult to explain to the public.
Yep.
And I could sit down and try to write something that would explain it, but it's really a little obtuse to most people, I would guess. If it's hard for the bunch of us to figure out, even after 20 minutes of discussion, you can imagine what John Doe is thinking in his living room. So that's first of all, and I think we need to think about how to present this on paper, first of all, and then further, so that the people who eventually are going to pay for this understand, or may pay for this, understand what they might be getting into whenever they get into it.
Yeah.
Okay, the second, and I think that we ought to work on that now. I think we should start putting down on paper what's happening when, in terms of these commitments, whether it's to the concept or to the money. They're a little bit different. It's a little bit fuzzy, but it shouldn't be fuzzy. And secondly, after the Army presented its feasibility plan in last April, there was a lot of discussion about how they wanted commentary from the public, and 500 people answered and wrote things and presented things and so forth. And we didn't really get a good sense of that. The newspaper did some work and that was good, but now we're going to face another 45-day public hearing period, which may or may not be, again, overshadowed by COVID. So we don't have in-person meetings necessarily. How do we know what the impact of people's commentary is on what is presumed to be an ongoing final product? What's the impact of what we think at that point that we express to the Army? Are they going to come back and say, sorry, we're not doing that? Or, yeah, we think that's a good point, we'll revise something? What's the interactive relationship between this concept of community engagement and the way the Army Corps does its work?
Yeah, so I think that's a valid point, Susan, because and COVID's not making it any easier.
No.
I'm going to get them to answer that question, okay? Because I know I can tell you what they've done, but you guys are probably tired of hearing me talk about it. But I can tell you all 450 of those comments were reviewed, and they actually had to report out on every one of them. So I will, but I'll let them tell you that. I'll get them back to talk about what that process is going to look like.
Who did they report out to?
They have this large committee that's reviewed at 3 different tiers within the Army to make sure that they're following through on their own processes.
But
And
the
then it'll be
public
reflected in it.
the public doesn't know. The impression was that we would get an answer. It's like,
you'll see that the answers would be in the draft report.
so after this second draft, if Jane Doe says, I hate the whatever at this and this
Right.
spot on the plan, how does Jane Doe know that the Army's going to respond to that?
We'll have to ask them to find out. Dale, can you hear me? Dale had some things he wanted to add about the financing piece. Are you on there, Dale? I think you're on mute if you are. Kaylin, can you unmute? I think it's the 571 number.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, it's Dale. You should be able to talk now, Dale. All right, if we can get him back, we'll do that. Right now he can't talk, but Dale's listening in as well. Okay, Miss, if there's any other questions on the timeline, we'll be happy to answer them. Send cards and letters and let us know how we can further improve this. And we'll be happy to do that. And I will try. Oh, there's your Dale. I think you can talk now, right, Dale?
Yeah, yes, there's it's tricky. So sorry everyone, I'm driving in Virginia back to Northern Virginia, and I've been listening to the call. I just wanted to there's a demand I sense, and a legitimate demand for hard deadlines about who's funding what when, and I want to share with you. I worked on budget issues in Congress for a long time. The Army Corps wants a commitment, a general commitment. OMB, via the Army Corps, wants a general commitment from the city that it's going to pony up its share of the money to go forward. And once they have that confidence, they will request in the president's budget X number of dollars for phase one authorization, okay, for PED, and maybe for construction. That is a determination that the Office of Management and Budget in the White House will make at the moment the decision needs to be made, and they will submit that to Congress. And Congress will decide what they want to do with it. And Congress could just flat out ignore it and not authorize it, right? They could just say, we're not going to do this, and sorry, wait till next year. And even though OMB pushes hard, the White House pushes hard on Congress to fund phase one, to authorize the appropriation of money for phase one, whatever Congress decides to do, it will do. And in fact, Congress can take that request and tell or write the legislation to say, we're going to authorize phase one and phase two. So Congress is in control here, but you have to clear the first hurdle with with the Army Corps and OMB, right? And the other way around, the White House, OMB may never request money for this project because there are other political demands here that they want to fund elsewhere, maybe not in Charleston, but maybe in Houston. They may not request money, but Congress, the authorizing committee could say, you know what, we are going to request authorization money for phase one and phase two, or just phase one in Charleston, and write that in the law. And then the White House, in its negotiation process, is going to say, do we accept that or not, right? And those numbers have to fit in with what's called the budget resolution, which divides up money in the federal budget by category. I'm getting real technical, but I want to show is there's the demand exactness of who's going to fund what when. That's not going to happen. And then even once you have an authorization, you have to get appropriation money every year. So Congress appropriates money every year in its appropriations bill. And the Army Corps of Engineers is funded on what's called the Energy and Water Appropriations Bill, which is one of the subcommittees in the House on House and Senate on appropriations. The project may be authorized at, let's just say, $100 million in any given year, or $50 million. And Congress may decide to give it only $35 million, to appropriate only $35 million. And then the Army Corps of Engineers and the project designers and the construction folks, if you're in construction, they need to figure out, we were expecting 50, but we're only getting 35. What does that do to our schedule? So this is a very sloppy and dynamic process. So to, vis-a-vis what Congress is going to do and how they give the money, and then what the city's obligations are going to be to meet its 1/3 commitment to funding in any phase or any given year. So this is dynamic, and I'm sorry to say it's sloppy. So to hunt for exactness or certitude here is that's not going to happen. I think we just should understand, how that works. And then Mark pointed this out, and this is something that I think we should all pay attention to. If there is a hurricane that strikes the southeast coast and gets Charleston and Myrtle Beach or whatever, Congress will, in its spasm of we're going to do something good, Congress will pass an emergency authorization, which may create full federal funding to do the project. And of course, then that's great because you have your authorization, but then every year you have to get your appropriation to actually spend the money. Okay, and then it gets obligated and then it gets outlaid. Okay, and that's done by then the Army Corps office when they start to let contracts. So you have this convoluted process on the Hill, in Washington and on the Hill, that's going to make it difficult to get the certitude that you're seeking. And so my advice is to not promise anyone any certitude here, because Congress is going to do what it does, and we're in an environment now politically where we want to spend money on infrastructure, and in 5 years from now that could change very quickly and the money for the Army Corps could dry up. So be aware that that dynamic is at play here. No matter what the city is trying to control and get its handle on, these federal entities are going to play a large role in how this thing rolls out forward too. And the Army Corps in the Charleston district is just one of the entities within the Army Corps and within the executive branch agencies that are trying to work on this.
Dale,
So,
very, sorry to interrupt, but very, very helpful. In prior discussions, though, there was a thread that I think there's recognition that we're going to be running a gauntlet here, and a lot of a lot of vagaries in the process. I think we get that. One of the themes of past discussions is, and to Susan's point, how do we communicate to the citizenry the ultimate viability of us attaching our cart to this big horse? If the horse comes up lame, we've lost a lot of time, a lot of opportunity to protect the city. And so there is a decision tree, there's a convoluted, fuzzy process, got it. But how do we clarify the ultimate likelihood that it makes sense to sort of throw all of our emphasis on this mega project?
Right. Again, so I think once the city, that's a very good question. Once the city commits itself that it wants to move forward with phase 1 of PED, there's an assumption here that they're not going to stop there, right? I mean, the city can pull back and say we're not going to fund phase 2, and we'll stop here. But once you start to spend that money, you're committing yourself like this is something we need to do. This surge risk that the Army Corps of Engineers and the city are trying to mitigate through this investment, through this this planning, design, engineering, construction phase, it's essential. We need to do that. So that's just sort of the moral persuasive a commitment. We're going to mitigate this risk, and then of course how that risk gets mitigated and how it integrates with the city fabric and its cultural and aesthetic and other fabrics, that's going to be crucial in the design phase. But yes, we need to deal with this. We need to mitigate this surge risk, and we're going to go down this road with the Army Corps because they're the only ones who can do it, and they're willing to pay 2/3 of the bill. So I think that's what needs to be communicated. Whether we know these things. Dan knows this. You have, and anyone who's dealt with capital infrastructure projects, there are delays that are going to come up, and sometimes they're administrative, and sometimes they're physical situations, and sometimes they're political or whatever financial situations. That is going to occur too. So we should never communicate. And I say we because I consider myself part of this, informally part of this team right now. We should never communicate any level of like, okay, it's going to be done in 2026, phase 1. We should not do that because there are so many variables here that goes along with, planning, engineering, design, and construction, and then throw the political and the federal financial on top of it. It's tricky. So, but we're making the commitment that we understand the surge risk. We agree that the surge risk needs to be mitigated, that this structure right now is the best way we can mitigate that surge risk. And we're going to move forward in a sort of coherent but adaptive process with the Army Corps to mitigate the surge risk and make sure this money is spent wisely and also spent in a way that doesn't destroy or harm the city's fabric that we all love, right? So this commitment has to say, yes, we're going to mitigate the surge risk. And I also believe we have to say we're going to mitigate the stormwater risk and the tidal risk and other things, but not with the structure. So I mean, this is a complex thing, and it's not going to be easy to communicate, but it's going to take constant. It's going to take constant communication with the public and engagement by many of us to share this with the public. But at the end of the day, it's going to be on the the leaders to say this is what we want to do, or this is what we don't want to do, or we're willing to accept this level of surge risk without any mitigation against it because we have other priorities, right? That's a decision. That's a political decision by council and the mayor that that's beyond all of our pay grades, I think. So.
Councilmember Waring, you have your hand up. Go ahead, sir.
I do. Thank you. I certainly appreciate everything that Dale had to say, in particular, explaining the minutiae of the process in Washington. But we've had large infrastructure projects before that we've done. And I would go to the Ravenel Bridge being the largest to date. And we had dates and we had targets and we had financial strategies to accumulate the local match. We've done this before in this region. The match for the Ravenel Bridge initially was going to be a property tax increase on every property owner. It eventually morphed into the first half-cent sales tax. That's where the local match came from, and that momentum was built in the community, basically because a consultant was hired that put together a strategy. The chamber actually raised the money for all the billboards and the ads to build to put that information, Susan, out in the community as to why we needed to do that. Okay. You say, okay, Keith, that's just a flyer. That's just one example. Tell me another one. When Mayor Raleigh and Steve Bedard and council put together the financing strategy for the September Clark Spring Fishburne $150 million drainage project that we have seen right before our eyes unfold, there was a financing strategy put together. At the time, the State Infrastructure Bank, Mayor Raleigh and council and team went to Columbia and got $88 million for that. Then there was a $10 million, I believe, grant for beautification. That's the first thing that was done that came from the federal government. And then the city cobbled together stormwater funding as well as monies from the TIF district, believe it or not, from the Gilliard and all of that. So that's where our local match came from. Dates were put out in the future when this project was completed, would be completed. And guess what? Those dates have been expanded and pushed back. And the original $154 million project is now a $200 million project. The cost overrun came. Mike is on this call. He got gray hair just like me, trying to find out, along with the mayor, where are we going to get the additional funding for that? So what Susan is asking for, and what Bob is asking for, you're right to feel like it's fuzzy, because we've been kicking this can down the road, and I don't think it's unfair for the committee to say, where's the city portion coming from? Where is that financial strategy? And I would like to know that also. So to kick it down to December, we're about to, I think it's Thursday, we've got a first budget ad hoc committee meeting. Mike will be on that, the mayor will be on that, a number of us, and that's to put together the city budget. Where is that process for this? How long has this committee been meeting? I don't know, a year or more? Okay.
No.
That should not be, that's something that should be coming together, and not to wait on December to find out is council going to support this or not. If there's a viable way to fund this 600 to 650, I think 2 meetings ago, maybe $700 million match, we can't wait till December to say, because it's going to be the cobbling together of funding from a number of sources. So I think the committee needs to be part of this process, that financial strategy for the local match, because the worst thing that can happen after Dale just explained, I refer to as the minutiae of federal funding, and it's kind of like making sausage. He's right. For us not to have our local match would be a travesty. And for us not to know at least where we're going to build the momentum to communicate to the public at large, this is how we can do it. We can't wait for December on that. I think that should have already been being worked on, frankly. And I can say for one, as of August, what's the day, 11th, 2021, I have not been involved with a strategy to help cobble together the city's match to make this become a reality. I have not been involved with a strategy to communicate, to market that idea to city residents of the region. This is why we need to do this to protect the peninsula and beyond, so to speak. So I can unequivocally say I have not been involved with that. Now, of course, I could be the odd person out. Maybe a consensus working on that, but and I'd be happy to be wrong on that. But I would say this: I don't know of an effort where any city in the state of South Carolina has put together a local funding strategy for a municipality to the tune of $600 to $700 million. I'm not saying that can't be done. I'm saying it can be done, but you're not going to do it kicking the can down the road and winging it. So I throw that out because I think it's unfair to all the good work that's been done on this committee that when it comes to simple, somebody walks up and says, the emperor have any clothes on? And we who are stakeholders remain quiet on that. I think it's a travesty to do that to you all. So if we're not, if we're going to build a building, you got to have a blueprint. If you're going to pay for something, and to pay for that building, you have to have a financial strategy. Whether that's going to a bank and you got to put together some equity yourself, etc. So that piece shouldn't be I really don't think it's that complicated. Now, if our number is 650 million, where are we going to get that 650 million from? And if you put together financial minds and stakeholders in the room and marketing minds in the room, you can get that done. To date, I have not been a part of that process. Now, Mike can, if he's still on the call, he can share whether he's been a part of that. And if he's not been a part of that, then I think it's incumbent upon stakeholders, and you all, everybody on this call is a stakeholder in this process. I don't think there's anything wrong with demanding that process at the very least begins now. And don't wait till December. Thank you, Mr.
Councilor Waring, that's a great segue, and appreciate that commentary, and I would love to have you on the funding working group and Councilmember Seekings as well, to kind of talk through that. But that's a great segue. I know we're kind of getting short on time, and into our funding working group update. So Cashin, if you wouldn't mind, it was kind of a dovetail into Councilmember Waring's comments, providing that update.
Sure, and I would echo those comments. We would, of the chairman, we would love to have you, Councilman Waring and Seekings, we would love to have you all join our next funding working group meeting. We have been emailing this week with looking for a couple of common dates to get Amy Wharton or her delegate to come and meet with our group. We meet virtually as well. We last met last week for our funding working group, and I'll just kind of review the information that we have to date on some of the city's financials. And this information is courtesy of Councilman Seekings. The city's principal sources of funding are property tax, business license fee revenue, parking fee revenue, and then smaller pots of funding exist through stormwater fees and through the hospitality tax. The city's municipal bonding capabilities are capped at 8% of the state value of city-owned properties or city-owned assets, excuse me. And so that value is roughly about $100 million, and 40% of that amount is currently obligated. The city can go over and above that $100 million cap by public referendum. So consequently, the city's funding sources for an infrastructure project of this size are highly limited. As I mentioned, we still want to talk to the city CFO and are working through Mark and Kaylin to arrange that, to talk about some maybe some special taxing districts like a municipal improvement district and others. But as Councilman Waring alluded to, the city's got to fill these funding gaps with potential partners at the city, or excuse me, at the county and through the state. And it just highlights what we've talked about before, that the city's really got to engage in some conversations to talk about this project as having a statewide impact with statewide implications on our tourism economy, on the medical district, et cetera. So we've got to build that case for the statewide impact of the project if indeed the city elects to pursue the project. We also talked about maybe engaging with the Municipal Association of South Carolina to talk about potential other funding solutions that might exist that state law might enable that we haven't thought of. So we still have some work to do and some unanswered questions. And so we did have a question to pose maybe to Mark and Kaylin, possibly to the chairman, about there was, I think, a pressing need to report to City Council on some recommendations for their next meeting on the 17th. The funding working group is certainly not prepared, given the scope of our work, to make any sort of funding recommendation to City Council on the 17th. We feel that that date is almost arbitrary when we haven't seen the full report from the Corps. That's not due, of course, until the 10th of September. We don't have a price tag for the project, and we're just not prepared to make any recommendations on funding just yet. Our funding working group has a lot of work remaining yet to do. And so that would conclude our report. And I'm happy to defer to members of my working group if they have any supplemental information that I may have passed over.
Thanks, Cash. I mean, and this is just a follow up on that last topic, and Mark and Kaylin can speak further to that. I think everybody's in agreement there on the time frame, specifically given that, and particularly given that the release of the report on September 10th. And so anyway, I think that those dates were modified on the and in conjunction with everything being pushed back per that comment earlier from Mark and Kaylin. So anyway, well, good news is we'll have a little bit more time to review everything and get through everything.
Yeah, if I could just add to go ahead, Bob.
Sorry, I've shared both of these comments with Cash, and I apologize, maybe not to the rest of the group, but 2 points. I think the scope of the group, I think our mandate should be receiving information, not generating a strategy for the city. It seems a little ass backwards. We should be getting informed by the city what the strategy is to fund this project. not the other way around. That's point one. As a corollary to that, having a discussion, having a presentation from Amy, I think is essential. The notion that it would be her delegate, I think is totally unacceptable. I mean, this is the CFO of the city, probably the biggest project that we'll see, that the CFO will see in our careers. We shouldn't be having a tough time pursuing this information. What is it, to Councilman Waring's point? Hey, we're sort of late in the game now. We're talking about counseling the public via a referendum event or whatever to support this big project. What's the strategy? We shouldn't be coming up with that strategy. We should be hearing about what the city plans to do. My opinion only. Thank you.
Yeah, Bob, let me just jump in and say there was no indication that Amy would not come herself. So that was just, I think, put out there in case for some reason, she had an emergency, but there's no indication of that. She's always very responsive.
Mark, if I could follow up, I mean, first of all, Cashin, great job on the summary of our working group, and I thank you tremendously for chairing that subcommittee. I would strongly suggest, based on Councilman Waring's comments, when we do have the ability to have Amy speak with us, it would be good to invite Councilman Waring and Councilman Seeking, because I think it would be good. We're very excited to hear Amy's insights, and I agree with Mark. I think Amy is extremely responsive. I also know that she has a lot on her plate, but it's going to be very important, because the more I hear about the funding issue, and I think Dale did a great job outlining more of the uncertainties that we would face. And as part of the due diligence we're doing, it's to try and eliminate unknowns and uncertainties. And I think that hopefully Amy can shed some light on that. So hopefully we can get Councilman Waring to join us if possible.
Let me follow up, if you will. Cashin, great report. But Cashin knows right now, just as several of us on this call knows, we talked, I know I mentioned it about a month ago, maybe last week, not a month, about the monies in Columbia right now, the $2.5 billion. Well, they're gonna, and I think it was in the paper last week, they're gonna receive that money in two parts. $1 billion this year, and they're gonna divide those monies up in September. And that billion, as I understand it, and Cashin, please help me out if you heard this similar thing. The first $1 billion is going to be divided this way: water projects, sewer projects, and broadband. And then next year, they're going to get $1.5 billion, and then all the from A to Z projects will get in. Now, somewhere between now and September, that $1 billion is going to be divided up across the state of South Carolina. I don't know if the city is asking for a slice of that. I know you say, well, this is drainage. This is a hybrid. This is also a water project. It's not a drinking water project, but it's definitely a water project. Are we in line at even asking for a portion of that $1 billion to, $100 million, $50 million, $75 million to go towards the possible first phase or second phase of building this wall? I can tell you one thing. It's kind of like, I say, I won't win the lottery whenever they play. I've never played the lottery, so it's impossible for me to win. But if we don't ask for some money, and I mean pretty soon, that first $1 billion, it's gonna get going. And to say that you got $1 billion that can be transformative, and we're not going to even put our hand out to say we got a legitimate project here that deserves some of this funding. And you're right, Cashin. those local option sales taxes that that we collect here, that goes to the state, and they send part back, hospitality taxes, accommodation sales tax, the whole state benefits from that. Should Charleston get devastated, or swamped, believe me, that revenue source will not only hurt Charleston, it will hurt the state of South Carolina as well, because tourism is the #1 income producer to the state of South Carolina, followed by income from the State Ports Authority, and then the third area is government dollars, like Fort Jackson and various bases throughout the state of South Carolina. So there's a financial argument for part of that $1 billion. That's going to be divided up basically in the next 30 days. Do we have a request? Cashin, Bob, Susan, Dan, I don't know. So,
Councilmember Waring, I can answer that. We requested probably, and I don't know the exact amount, probably 50 or more $1 million worth of projects for that, towards that $1 billion. Not this, because this project is not yet an approved project. So when we talked to the folks in Columbia, they wanted something that was signed and approved. So I'm just giving you the reality. If you haven't seen that list, we need to get that to you.
We need to get it to him, but I'll tell you what, I'm familiar with other projects that isn't signed and approved yet. That's getting in line to get money for that. So that definition about signed and approved. I know other projects that's asking for more money than 50. That's at least they're in line. I don't know whether they're going to get funded.
We probably played by the rules, right? Cashin?
I understand that this project is not approved by council, but what about the water plan recommendation? Is that not something that we could ask Columbia for the funds now to go ahead and get moving on?
I think we put that in there.
I mean, that definitely is.
I think that's in there.
Is it?
I think it is, yeah. I don't,
because that's something that we could definitely get
might
moving
not be.
on.
It was on and
Okay.
off. Okay.
We need to, that's something that's in the Dutch dialogues. It's in, I think it's in the city plan. It's something that we definitely need to, even if we don't do this project, it's something that we need for the entire city as we evaluate other flood mitigation strategies. So it's not in there. It's something that we need to get Columbia working.
And we did submit that as part of a budget request for this year. So that's already been done. But of course, the first budget committee meeting hasn't even happened yet.
And is that Dale here, is that a citywide water plan?
It is. The one that we put in the budget is citywide, yes.
That's terrific. I think committing to helping the entire city is an essential signal. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Back to you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Well, thank y'all. So I think next go to Susan Lyons with regards to the EIS working group. I'm sorry, geez. I'm Laura Cantrell with regards to the EIS working group. But
Thank you.
Thank you. The EIS working group met last week, and we had a good discussion, 3 points that I'll report out on, and I'll then invite other members of that working group to add to or correct anything that I got wrong. We also had some discussion around this, I think has now been put to bed, but there have been some committee discussion about the chair reporting out on August 17th, and we had concerns, same thing that Cashin reported from the finance working group, that we weren't, this committee's not ready to present recommendations, certainly, or really even an update. So I think that is not part of the planning, but it would be helpful to clarify, Mr. Chairman. I think I heard you say that that's off the table as a marker for August 17th. The other thing that we talked about, we appreciated the opportunity as individuals to review the embargoed draft of the city's section to be included in the draft feasibility study that's going to be released on September 10th. We don't entirely understand what that document is, so we'd like to really understand what it is, what its intention is, how formal is it, and we also don't understand the process. I mean, we had some discussion about, we each received the draft as individuals with a request from Mark and Kaylin to respond directly to them with feedback, which I have done, and I understand others have done as well. While our working group understands the need for protecting sensitive information and confidentiality, to be an effective committee and have robust process and discussion, it would certainly help to be able to have some discussion about what we think about that draft and how this committee can play a role in improving that document. Again, once we better understand what it is and what the intention and level of formality behind it is. We had, as individuals, talked about some of our concerns and think that it can be stronger. So that was our second point of discussion. And then the final thing, which is really recapping what we reported out from our first meeting, specifically with regard to the environmental impact statement. We are going to be looking closely and hoping to see in the draft that comes out in September, proper consideration of nature-based solutions, the core looking at the same level of sea level rise as the city, ensuring ecosystem health and public access, avoiding adverse impacts to historic properties, and addressing unintended consequences to other parts of the city beyond the peninsula. So that's a summary of points that we came up with in our first working group discussion. Working group, what else would you like to add? What did I leave out?
I think you covered it. You were comprehensive. Thanks, Laura.
And we're happy to take any questions or comments.
No, thanks, Laura. I think that was very helpful. I think it'll be particularly with the EIS getting released at the same time as on that September 10th date, rather. That'll provide additional good opportunity to review. And then, finally, Susan, if you could give the communications update, that would be great. Thank you.
Hi, unfortunately, my other two members aren't here. And also, unfortunately, I don't have from Doug a layout of the one-piece communications marketing, document to begin to inform the public about what we're doing. And I'm not sure what the timeline is on that. I know that Doug has been very involved in a project this week for the city, so I'm sure that that's taken his time and that of the other members. We had really just a brief discussion about both the document that Mark had sent out and also about how we discuss the Army Corps project in general with the public. I know from discussions with people in general that the sense is that this is sort of a done deal and that the city is going to move ahead and that the documents that come out of the city, like the comprehensive plan and others, assume that the Army Corps project is on track to move ahead. None of us on this committee, I don't think, understand that that is indeed the case. So I think that we have a perception issue in the community about the project on a lot of levels, probably. And we need to do a really full-blown community engagement program. And the suggestion was made at one point that we hire a consultant in the public relations community to put together a program to get this information out. I don't know whether that's a feasible thing to think about or not, but I'm waiting to get this document to send to you all. I did send the copy to you, and I understand that it's okay because nobody said too much back to me. So we'll kind of go from there. But I am concerned about the community engagement and the information that is missing out there in the public. I can't stress that enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. I think that 4-pager that y'all are working on is a great effort and will help to address those concerns. So certainly appreciate all y'all's work on that. And you know, I do think we are running short on time here. And Kaylin, do we still have a quorum here?
Let me count. We do, yes, because Mr. Maybank joined us even though Dan had to drop off. So I know we're scheduled to go till 11. So I know if other folks probably have to just drop off at that point too. So whatever business, if we need to have done, needs to be done in the next 12 minutes to have our quorum.
Yeah, understood. So, you know, I think we went a little bit over, reasonably so, on the timeline front. I think that was a important topic to stay on. You know, our next, I guess, I don't know if motion's the right word, but a next topic I wanted to get everybody discussing was the just high level need for some form of perimeter protection, subject to you know, additional clarifications, movement on, you know, all sorts of issues, but just the high level need for perimeter protection. I you know, received a lot of, I should say, I received communication in favor of that, folks in favor of that. I received some hesitancy on a number of items. And so anyway, I wanted to, you know, similar to what we did with the water plan, how we, you know, made a high level motion and then tweaked the language to meet everybody's input and understanding. Wanted to do the same thing as it relates to the need for some form of perimeter protection. And so, Kaylin, would you mind walking me through the process for making that motion, to make it an official motion? And then of course, after we do that, we open it up for discussion.
Right. I don't think you need an official motion now. You're just going to have a discussion to collect information. You would do probably, if you're able to gather language as we did for the water plan by the next
meeting.
Make that
the official.
You could make a motion to approve that language at the next meeting.
Understood. Okay, great. Well, yeah. So I'll open it up then to the group for discussion.
Where is this motion going? Where is this statement going?
It would be in the same format and going to the same place as the water plan. So using that as a example.
So you want to send it to council?
Correct. Yeah, it would be basically part of the report, or, you know, a additional piece of the report back as part of our effort to move from kind of education to action.
So I'm still not completely clear. Hey, Good, are you suggesting that we as a committee develop a statement that would say we understand that there is surge risk for the peninsula, and we believe that there's a need for some kind of perimeter protection, and that we would develop that language, and then someone would make a motion to approve it. And then if it were approved, it would go to council. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. It's exactly right. Yes. And so thought here, we just don't have that much time to do it. So I hate to kind of rush this in 9 minutes, but the point was that having that discussion, going through it, in general, we made that kind of thought on email, starting that language. Most folks were in support of it. Some folks, I think, had some hesitancy as it related to specifics on it, but wanted to, continue that effort and drive it to some sort of conclusion. So anyway, I just want to open it up for general discussion. If everybody wanted to, or if anybody wanted to, voice their support or, issues with it, or, desire for clarifications, that would be what I'd like to use this time for, prior to developing specific language and agreeing on it.
Mr. Chairman, this is Cashin. Maybe I guess this is a question for Dale and Mark regarding the Dutch dialogues. I know there's language, and I'm having trouble jogging my memory. There is language in the Dutch dialogue saying that we have, in order to, I think, avoid a retreat, that we need to adopt the Dutch polder model and have some sort of perimeter protection. Is there any way that before our next meeting we could send us that specific language from the Dutch dialogue's final report? Dale, is this jogging your memory?
It's definitely in there.
Yeah, it's definitely in there. So this is not a foreign concept. I mean, this is city policy. The city council adopted the Dutch dialogues as formal city policy in January of 2020. So it's in there. So I think if we're looking to have a motion, we can lift language that is already formal city policy from the Dutch dialogue report. I just don't recall exactly what it said.
I'll add a couple of other, in addition to the Dutch dialogues, it's in the perimeter protection analysis report. And also, if you look at our current comprehensive plan, it assumes that it's not approved yet, but the one that's out for discussion among city council, it assumes that there's bird protection around the peninsula. So there's 3 different documents that you could reference.
Right. Hey, good. We had talked about marrying this up with the committee's unanimous recommendation to city council to institute immediately a water plan, comprehensive water plan. Where does that first resolution stand? Has that been submitted? Are we sitting on that? Where is that?
So talk to Mark and Kaylin a little bit about that over the course of this week. Just to avoid me kind of butchering the procedural concept. Mark, Kaylin, do y'all mind addressing, answering that question?
So there's 2 parts to that, Bob. One is the actual motion or the recommendation from the committee. And 2 is it's got to be a funded item in the budget. As we've heard a couple times today, the budget meetings for next year are just getting ready to start now. I think this week, maybe Thursday or next week, Thursday is the first actual budget meeting. It's already been submitted in a document for next year's budget. It's been submitted to the finance people. Doesn't mean it'll stay in there. It means it's in there. Okay. So
that wasn't the question, Mark.
Okay.
Where does the advisory group's unanimous resolution stand at this moment? Has it been submitted to the city, or are we waiting for something to occur?
Waiting to get the chairman on the agenda for city council to make a series of recommendations or updates. The last time this group met, they said they weren't ready for that. So we took that off of the agenda for August 17th. And there was some requests that it would only be updates, not recommendations. So we have the chairman on in September to make a series of recommendations, and hopefully we can get to that point where we're ready to do that.
Can't the chairman simply send the recommendation to council?
I don't know.
I-
Typically what we do is, but again, there was from this group, there was not consensus that you were ready to send any recommendations. In fact, you were not even ready to provide updates.
We were ready to recommend that a water plan be
Right.
adopted. So can't that simply go? That's been sitting around for weeks.
We can put it on the next agenda and send it, yes. If that's what this committee wants to do, we can do that. If you're ready for that.
I mean, this is hey good. I'm absolutely, yeah, I'm comfortable with that.
I think we thought it was going to council. I did.
Just as it's Dale here, just as a matter of consideration, perimeter protection for surge risk is one component of a water plan for the peninsula, but there are other water risks, as we know, for the peninsula, and then there are other water risks around the city. So perhaps an essential component of a water plan for the peninsula is going to be surge risk mitigation, because in a water plan and as we discussed this to develop the recommendations in the land and water analysis for the city/comp plan, it is that the coherence and viability of the city as a whole is contingent upon the ongoing operations, as we know them now, of the medical district and the College of Charleston and tourism and all the other things that occur on the peninsula, because that is, that's the golden goose, right? That's the golden egg. So as valuable as the other parts of the city are to the city identity, it is the peninsula that maintains that or exemplifies that, and a surge event would destroy that. And that's why the Dutch Dialogues recommended, as well as in the land and water analysis, we said a surge reduction or perimeter protection system that reduces surge. And ideally, if we were kings, right, if David Wagner and I were kings, that would deal with tidal impacts too. The Corps of Engineers can't do that, sadly. But something that can eliminate this or mitigate the surge risk for the peninsula is essential. So that's how those two things tie together. Water plan, surge is one part of a water plan for the peninsula, but a water plan for the peninsula and the rest of the city is essential, of which surge risk is but one.
I thought we agreed to that, and I thought that was going to council, and that the water plan is certainly citywide and comprehensive, and that part of it is this perimeter protection.
I wasn't involved in those discussions. If I just wasted your time by explaining that, I apologize. I just wanted to make that
No,
clear.
Dale, that was helpful.
Yeah.
Susan, I think that I think the issue is that it got lumped in with just a larger series of items. Not to mention, I think there were several items on this past council agenda where this could end up getting looked over as well, or not looked over, but there are a lot of pressing items on this last agenda as well. So,
Right.
Point being that I think whatever we got clarity here. I think we can go in with just this update, and then just say, hey, we're we're not able to speak on recommendations or summaries at the moment, but we do have this pressing forward. So, but hey, everybody, I apologize to do this. It's an important item, but I have 11 o'clock. I am late for, so I need to jump off. But thank you all for your time, and please feel free to continue on without me.
Yeah, just one point of clarification. That will not be on the next city council meeting because that agenda's already been done. It would be on the following city council meeting now. We'll go ahead and get that ready. So I would recommend, my strong recommendation would be to get several of these recommendations flushed out. If you're going to do a water plan, recommend also that if the council or if this committee agrees that surge protection is required, and do the two of those together. I think I've already heard once that from several people that's one. I would get those two packaged up together. But that's my recommendation. I wouldn't go forward just a water plan, just because it's.
Why?
Well, because if this is integral to the water plan, it gives extra emphasis to the need for a water plan.
Thank you all. I'm out of here.
All right.
Thanks.
Yep.
Are we over? We're done. That was very bizarre.